seen any of the nuclear feeds that run concurrent to benchmark dates on these cases that occurred between the United States and Iran? You ever seen it? Hmm? You know, it fits a specific kind of racial profile. There's a particular kind of demographic. And the thing is that on one hand, a lot of these accounts end up referencing former First Lady, former Senator, and former Secretary of State who wants to be president. But it involves biometric data from a woman who was a minor at the time these cases were occurring. So there's a couple of things where you, like, as I've said, if you raise the bar, then it tears out on both sides. It's not just that if you raise the bar, then you can delay and delay and delay, where you end up in the pipeline further and further forward. You also go back a requisite amount as well, right? And so, if you've got a problem with, say, the timeline around the first Gulf War, then please remember that 6 months before the first Gulf War, a bunch of people here in Texas had a conference on the Permian Basin. I've seen the agenda. I was aware of that conference at the time it was occurring, 6 months before the first Gulf War, before the invasions during the first Gulf War, just so you know. So when I contact you on the anniversary and I say I have very important matters to discuss, and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, there's no one, I don't know who to talk to, and you're literally the attorney for that consortium, you better hope something doesn't come up later. Like what I just found again, right here, in these Iranian case laws that have been going on for a while, these correlations. If you've ever read them, it's fascinating to read them about how they could have, gotten this international tribunal together and nobody really wanted to take any responsibility. It was like a clash of different ways of being, different ways of understanding. What does it mean to make a commitment? What are you really committing to? And unfortunately, if you have standards that are so disparate and you have such bad faith involved, it seems to kind of accumulate. Like this thing that I've been dealing with for a very long time. Collins Systems International Inc. versus the Navy of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Case number 431, 16 June 1992. For the establishment of a communications system in Iran known as the Pearl Program. In the request, the agent states that the respondent considers it against justice that on the one hand, it be condemned and on the other, no award be made for the refund of the advance payments affected by the respondent to the claimant, or at least for the deduction of the judgment debt from the advance payments. Really, it seems to be the kind of thing we're dealing with now, right? Years and years and years later, this was from 1992. Years and years and years later, nobody wants to deal with what it means to expect advance payments, especially if those advances are coming from a child, but are being represented as having come from an adult, right? Things can get complicated when you refuse to acknowledge that. You know where they get even more complicated? Westinghouse Electric Corporation versus the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran Air Force, Iran Air, National Iranian Oil Company. Case number 389. This is the best part, assholes. 12 February 1987. 97? 2007? 2017? 1 year later, 31, an inverse of 13. You could have taken the call that day. You could have taken the call that day for Westinghouse Electric Corporation. And you could have done something to address what had happened a few years earlier in Fukushima. But you didn't do that. You lied. It got there on time. You lied and stole it and murdered children. You murdered children on Valentine's Day to float their murders as an advance so that you could cover up for an intentional effort to default on military housing because you wanted your Puerto Rico plan, right? You know, all those intelligence assets that got damaged by the hurricane. You murdered those children in Florida so that you could intentionally default on nuclear responsibilities that you had intentionally defaulted on at least 3 times that I caught you, and at least twice that could have been stopped if you had stopped fucking me so that you could cover up for the crimes of one specific person. The other thing is that last year was the 100th anniversary of a major contract signed by Westinghouse with the workers in the subway in New York City. And I contend there was some sort of obligation, maybe even a bond, 100-year bond, and you intentionally wanted to nuke the subway. And now you want to talk about transportation safety? Huh? 127 co-sponsors. 10 days. 10 days after what would have been the 2002, 2012, 28 years and 10 days after you set up a hit for a radio bond.